She refused to let a soldier hurt an Apache boy. A war chief repaid her in a way she'd never forget. Before starting this story, I'd like to take a moment to ask for your help. If you enjoy the stories we share, please help the channel reach the goal of 1,000 subscribers. I'd be very happy if you could subscribe. Without further delay, let's dive into this emotional story. The Arizona Territory sun beat down mercilessly on Fort Apache as Sarah McKenna hung wet laundry on the line behind the commander's quarters. The year was 1883, and the harsh desert landscape stretched endlessly beyond the adobe walls, dotted with mesquite and palo verde trees that offered little respite from the scorching heat. Sarah wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, her calloused fingers testament to years of frontier life as the post's schoolteacher and unofficial nurse. The sound of raised voices and scuffling feet drew her attention toward the main courtyard. Through the gap between buildings, she saw a cluster of soldiers surrounding something, or someone. Private Henderson's voice carried above the others, slurred with whiskey despite the early hour. "Little savage thinks he can steal from us," Henderson spat, his fist cocked back. Time someone taught him proper respect. Sarah's breath caught as she glimpsed the small figure at the center of the circle. A Apache boy, no more than 10 years old, his dark eyes wide with fear, but holding a defiant spark that reminded her of her own son, lost to fever 3 winters past. The child's worn moccasins and patched clothing spoke of the desperate conditions on the nearby reservation, where government rations ran short and children often went hungry. Without thinking, Sarah dropped the wet sheet she'd been hanging and strode toward the commotion. Her heart pounded as she pushed through the ring of soldiers, their unwashed bodies reeking of sweat and alcohol. Henderson's hand was raised, ready to strike the trembling boy who clutched a small piece of hardtack, likely taken from the mess hall's refuse pile. "Stop!" Sarah's voice cut through the desert air like a whip crack. She positioned herself between Henderson and the child, her slight frame dwarfed by the soldier's bulk, but her resolve unwavering. "What kind of man strikes a hungry child?" Henderson's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "This ain't your concern, schoolmarm. This little thief needs to learn his place." "His place?" Sarah's green eyes flashed with indignation. "His place is with his people, not cowering before grown men who should know better." She knelt beside the boy, her voice gentling. "What's your name, child?" The boy looked up at her with uncertainty, then whispered in halting English, "Nalnish. I was hungry." Sarah's heart clenched. She recognized the name. It meant "he works" in the Apache tongue, something she'd learned from the reservation's interpreter. Standing slowly, she faced Henderson again, her jaw set with determination. "This boy has done nothing wrong that a decent meal wouldn't cure," she declared, her voice carrying to the other soldiers who had begun to shift uncomfortably. "If you want to punish someone for the crimes of hunger and desperation, you'll have to go through me first." The tension in the courtyard was palpable, dust motes dancing in the afternoon light as 2 worlds collided over the fate of one small, frightened child. Henderson's face flushed red as the other soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. Captain Morrison's wife had considerable influence at the fort, and crossing her could mean trouble with the commanding officer. But Henderson's pride, fueled by whiskey and witnessed by his peers, wouldn't let him back down easily. "You're making a mistake, Mrs. McKenna," Henderson growled, his fists clenching and unclenching. "These people need to learn respect, or they'll think they can take whatever they want." Sarah kept her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "What I see is a child who took scraps from our garbage to fill his belly. If that threatens you, Private, perhaps you should examine your own conscience." Sergeant Williams, an older soldier with graying temples, stepped forward. "Henderson, stand down," the ladies made her point. His weathered face showed the wisdom of years on the frontier, where unnecessary conflict often led to unnecessary bloodshed. Henderson spat in the dust but lowered his fist. "This ain't over," he muttered before stalking away, his boots kicking up small clouds of red dirt. Sarah knelt again beside Nalnish, whose small hand still clutched the piece of hardtack. "Come with me," she said gently, Let's get you something proper to eat." The boy hesitated, glancing toward the fort's gates where the vast desert stretched toward his home. Sarah understood his conflict. Trust didn't come easily to his people. Not after decades of broken promises and betrayal. She stood and walked slowly toward her quarters, hoping he would follow. In her small kitchen, Sarah prepared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and dried beef. The boy ate with the careful intensity of someone who never knew where the next meal might come from. As he ate, Sarah noticed the intricate beadwork on his moccasins, the careful stitching that spoke of loving hands, perhaps a grandmother or aunt who had taught him the old ways. "Your family knows you're here?" she asked gently. Nalnish nodded. "Grandmother says soldiers throw away good food. She is sick, cannot walk far for rations." His English was better than she'd expected, suggesting someone had taken time to teach him. Sarah's throat tightened. The Apache had been forced onto reservations, their traditional hunting grounds forbidden, their children sent to distant schools to be civilized. Yet here was this boy, risking punishment to care for his grandmother with the dignity and courage of his warrior ancestors. "What's your grandmother's name?" Sarah asked. "Lozen's daughter," the boy replied with pride. She knew the Great War. She fought beside him. Sarah's blood chilled. Lozen had been sister to Victorio, one of the most feared Apache leaders. If this boy was connected to that lineage, Henderson's anger was about more than stolen hardtack. It was about old wounds and bitter memories that ran deeper than the desert canyons. As evening approached, Sarah walked Nalnish to the fort's gates, pressing a small bundle of food into his hands. Unknown to either of them, eyes watched from the surrounding hills, Apache scouts who had witnessed the white woman's kindness to one of their own. 3 days passed before Sarah saw Nalnish again. This time he wasn't alone. An elderly Apache woman hobbled beside him, her weathered face marked by lines of hardship, but her eyes sharp with intelligence. Sarah recognized her immediately as one of the women who occasionally came to trade beadwork for supplies, though she'd never spoken directly to any of the soldiers' wives. The woman approached Sarah's quarters as the morning sun painted the adobe, walls gold. In her gnarled hands, she carried a small deerskin pouch decorated with intricate geometric patterns in blue and white beads. "You helped my grandson," the woman said in careful English, her voice like wind through canyon stones. I'm called Dazi. My daughter was sister to War Chief's sister." Sarah's breath caught. This woman was connected to Lozen herself, the legendary Apache warrior woman who had fought alongside Geronimo and Victorio. The stories told around the fort painted such people as bloodthirsty savages. Yet here stood a grandmother concerned only with her grandson's welfare. "Your grandson is a good boy," Sarah replied respectfully. "He was only trying to help you." Dazi's eyes studied Sarah's face with penetrating intensity. "You risked soldiers' anger for Apache child. Why?" The question hung in the desert air between them. Sarah thought of her own son, buried in the fort's small cemetery, and the universal language of a mother's love that transcended all boundaries of race and culture. "Because he's a child," Sarah said simply, "and because it was right." The old woman nodded slowly, then held out the beaded pouch. "Medicine bag, protection." She pressed it into Sarah's hands despite her protests. Grandson told his uncle about white woman who stood between him and soldier's fist. "Uncle wants to meet you." "His uncle?" Sarah asked. "War Chief Nayar," Dazi replied, using the Apache name. "White men call him Robert. He leads our people now, tries to keep peace. But some young warriors grow restless on reservation. They remember old ways, old freedoms." Sarah understood the implications. The Apache were caught between worlds, forced to live on government handouts while their traditional way of life vanished, yet expected to be grateful for their confinement. Young men raised on stories of their ancestors' fierce independence chafed under such restrictions. "When does he want to meet?" Sarah asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "Tomorrow, when sun touches horizon. Canyon of the Winds 1 mile, north of fort. Come alone." Dazi's expression grew grave. Dangerous for Apache chief to meet with white woman. Dangerous for white woman to meet with Apache chief. But grandson says your heart is good. Chief trusts grandson's eyes. That evening, Sarah sat in her small parlor, turning the medicine bag over in her hands. The beadwork was exquisite, each tiny bead placed with precise care to create patterns that told stories she couldn't read, but somehow understood. The leather was soft with age and handling, worn smooth by generations of Apache hands. Outside, her window, the desert night was alive with sounds. Coyotes calling across the vastness, the whisper of wind through mesquite branches, and somewhere in the distance, the faint rhythm of drums carrying messages across the darkness. Tomorrow would bring either understanding or disaster, but Sarah knew she had already crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Before continuing with the story, I'd like to take a moment to ask for your help. If you're enjoying this story, please help the channel reach the goal of 1,000 subscribers. I'd truly appreciate it if you could subscribe. Now, back to the story. The Canyon of the Winds lay in shadow as Sarah approached on horseback, her heart hammering against her ribs. The setting sun painted the sandstone walls in shades of gold and crimson, while ancient petroglyphs watched from their stone galleries like silent witnesses to countless meetings between peoples divided by culture, but united by the land they shared. War Chief Nayar, Robert to the Indian Agency, stood beside a small fire, his presence commanding despite his worn reservation clothes. Sarah had expected someone younger, but this man carried himself with the dignity of 50 years, his graying hair braided with strips of leather and small feathers. His face bore the weathered lines of someone who had seen his world transformed, beyond recognition, yet his dark eyes held both wisdom and sorrow. "You came," he said in English as Sarah dismounted. His voice carried the careful cadence of someone speaking a learned language. "Grandson spoke truth about your courage." "I came because a child's welfare should matter to all of us," Sarah replied, accepting his gesture to sit beside the fire. The flames danced between them, casting shifting shadows on the canyon walls. Nayar studied her for a long moment. "My people call this place Wind's Voice Canyon. Here, spirits of ancestors speak to those who listen. They told me of white woman who stood against soldiers' anger, who fed hungry child without asking price." He reached into a leather bag and withdrew something wrapped in soft deerskin. "In old days, when Apache warrior showed great courage or kindness to our people, we honored them with gift of protection. This custom predates white man's coming to our lands." Sarah watched as he unwrapped a beautiful silver bracelet, clearly old and crafted with extraordinary skill. The metal was worked into intricate patterns that seemed to flow like water, punctuated by small pieces of turquoise that caught the firelight. "This belonged to my grandmother, and her grandmother before. It was made by a great silversmith of Navajo people, traded to Apache for horses in days when we could still raid freely." His eyes met Sarah's across the flames. "I give this to you not as payment for kindness. Kindness cannot be purchased, but as recognition. You showed Apache heart when you protected my grandson's grandson." Sarah's throat tightened. "I can't accept something so precious to your family." "You must," Nayar said firmly. "To refuse would dishonor gift and giver. This bracelet has protected many Apache women through many dangers. Now it will protect you." As he fastened the bracelet around her wrist, Sarah felt the weight of its history, the lives it had touched, the storms it had weathered. The silver was warm against her skin, as if it had absorbed decades of body heat and human emotion. "There is more," Nayar continued. "Young warriors on reservation grow angry. Government promises food but delivers little. Children hungry, elders sick. Some speak of leaving reservation, returning to old ways in mountains. If this happens, soldiers will come. Blood will flow." Sarah understood. He was trusting her with information that could mean life or death for his people. "What can be done?" she asked. "Nothing, perhaps, but you have shown Apache heart. If trouble comes, remember, not all Apache chose war path. Some of us still believe White and Apache can share this land in peace. He stood, the firelight playing, across his weathered features. Wear bracelet with honor. Let it remind you that courage comes in many forms, and kindness is strongest medicine of all. As Sarah rode back toward the fort, the silver bracelet seemed to pulse with its own life, against her wrist. Behind her, the canyon held its secrets, while ahead, the fort's lights twinkled like earthbound stars. She had crossed more than distance today. She had crossed into a deeper understanding of what it meant to be human, in a world too often divided by fear and misunderstanding. Years later, when the Apache Wars finally ended, and the last warriors surrendered, Sarah would still wear the bracelet. It would remind her of a scared boy named Nalnish, an elderly grandmother named Dazi, and a war chief who chose trust over suspicion. Most importantly, it would remind her that in a single moment of moral courage, one person could change the course of many lives, including their own.